The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. Lord Voldemort drew the last rune into the earth and straightened. The lines were exact. They always were. 80 meters through the tree line, a light burned in the cottage window. It requires completion. The mother must choose death with full intention. If the intention is interrupted before the moment of completion, the ward does not form. He walked toward the cottage. He did not hurry. Hurrying was for men who were not certain of the outcome. James Potter was at the window when the garden gate opened. He saw, for 1 second, what was coming toward him across the grass. The dark robes, the white hands, the total absence of anything resembling urgency in the approach, and understood everything. He shouted one word upstairs. He drew his wand. He bought 11 seconds. He bought them running, overturning furniture, casting every defensive enchantment he knew in sequence, because buying time was the only thing left, and 11 seconds might be enough. For Lily to complete the ritual incantation, to finish the words, to seal the ward that her research had revealed. He thought, in the fraction of a second that produced the thought, of Sirius and Remus, who were supposed to have arrived an hour ago, and hadn't, and he understood why that was too, and filed it under things he could not change, and kept moving. There was a particular quality to the way James Potter did impossible things, without ceremony, without self-pity, with the complete operational commitment of someone who has never regarded the cost as a reason to stop. He was killed by the second spell, not the first. The first hit the doorframe, the second was precise and final, and James Potter died in his own entrance hall with his wand still warm, in his hand, and the expression of a man who knew what he was doing, and had chosen it anyway. He was 21 years old. He had understood, from the first night he joined the Order, what understanding the cost of something actually means. Voldemort stepped over him. He climbed the stairs without sound. Lily had Harry pressed to her chest when the door opened. She knew what had come. She had known since James's first shout, which told her everything, and what she had done in the seconds since was this. She had begun the words. The ancient words that form the intention. The specific verbal act of choosing, I offer myself freely in place of this child. That creates the love word, that transforms a mother's death into a shield that endures across decades. She had begun them. She had not finished them. Voldemort said, "Your sacrifice would have been beautiful. I have studied what it creates, and I find that I prefer to study you instead." The curse was not Avada Kedavra, the Somnum Perpetuum, an ancient binding that predated the Hogwarts founding by 4 centuries, documented in the Gaunt grimoires alongside a dozen spells that responsible. Magical theory had agreed to treat as lost, struck Lily Potter like a hand closing around a flame, not extinguishing it, containing it, folding the warmth inward, and sealing it there. The unfinished words collapsed into silence. The love ward did not form. The incomplete intention dissipated into the room's ambient magic like smoke. Lily's eyes closed. She did not fall. She settled, slowly, precisely, her arms still around the infant, and it was only when Voldemort performed the secondary gesture that her arms released and Harry was lowered to the floor by the magic's own precision. He did not cry. Voldemort looked at the infant on the floor and prepared the Maledictum Hereditas. He cast it. The mark settled into the child's forehead. Not a wound exactly, not a scar, but a signature, like a wax seal pressed into living skin. The Dark Lord's magical identity scored permanently into the boy's soul structure. It was a cold, permanent feeling, the way a brand feels when the iron lifts. The pain fades immediately. What remains is the mark, and the mark is forever. He felt the echo of his own soul before the mark had finished settling. He went very still. He had felt this sensation before, 7 times, counting tonight. The specific interior sensation of a soul fragment departing, the cold subtraction of self from self, the feeling that he had come to understand across 5 decades of study and practice. The fragment had not departed tonight. The fragment was here, in the child, looking up at him with green eyes that contained, beneath the infant's ordinary incomprehension, a resonance that he recognized with the certainty of a man who had been studying his own soul structure for longer than most wizards live. He stood over Harry Potter for a long time. The logical conclusion assembled itself in the same methodical way that all his conclusions assembled: premise, premise, implication, implication, conclusion. He had created a living Horcrux. He had done this before, intentionally, with objects chosen for their durability and obscurity. He had never done it with a person. He had certainly never done it with a person. Who would grow? Who would accumulate power? Who was the child of two exceptionally talented magical practitioners, one of whom he had just placed into indefinite suspension, rather than killing? A living Horcrux that grows stronger over time. A living Horcrux that is permanently bound to him by the maledictum hereditas. A living Horcrux that he controls. He reached down, he picked up the child. Harry Potter looked at him with the absolute seriousness of a baby who had already developed opinions, and Voldemort looked back, and something settled in his expression that was not warmth, and was not hatred, and was, perhaps, the closest thing to recognition he had felt since he first understood what he was. He said, very quietly, to no audience, "You will not be wasted." He walked out of the cottage without looking back at James Potter or at Lily, suspended in the center of the room, with her hands still reaching for something that was no longer there. The Ministry of Magic fell in 5 days. This was the part that surprised everyone, including the Death Eaters who had spent 2 decades preparing for it. How quiet it was. The senior Auror commander received a letter at his home before dawn the morning after the Potter cottage and did not come to work. The Deputy Minister for Magical Law Enforcement chose, after a specific conversation with Lucius Malfoy, to read an Imperial Compliance Declaration into the Ministry's official recording crystal before anyone had asked him to. 3 key Flu network switching stations were secured before the first light of morning. Alastor Moody arrived at Godric's Hollow in the hours before sunrise and sent his Patronus to Dumbledore before he had fully registered what he was looking at. The terrier Patronus streaked north through a lightening sky. Moody stood in the garden, the gate still open, the grass still bearing the impression of footsteps that had come from one direction, and not returned, and made himself look at everything. He noted the direction of approach. He noted the absence of forced entry. He noted the gate, which swung easily, which had not been locked. Because why would it be locked when the person you feared had no reason to know where you were, unless the person you had given that knowledge to had given it to someone else? Pettigrew, he thought. It could only be Pettigrew. Albus Dumbledore arrived 46 minutes later. He stood in the entrance hall with James at his feet, and Lily suspended above, and the cradle upstairs very thoroughly empty, and he was there for a long time. The expression on his face was one he would not show to anyone. He put it away. He began, from first principles, to recalculate. He summoned Minerva McGonagall through a charm that used no flue, no owl, no traceable channel, a specific coded resonance that the Order's surviving members would recognize and respond to. She arrived in 7 minutes, and when she saw his face she stopped asking questions and started listening. "The boy is alive," Dumbledore said. "He has been taken." McGonagall's expression shifted through several things in rapid succession, and arrived at a specific quality of controlled grief, the grief of someone who has been preparing for 11 years for a version of the worst outcome, and has found that the actual worst outcome exceeds all preparation. "Lily?" she said. "Alive, suspended. The Sumnum Perpetuum." He did not kill her. She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because he studied what she was doing," Dumbledore said, "and found it more interesting than her death." "Sirius and Remus?" "Sirius will be here within the hour, Remus. I have sent word." He paused. "What we do next is not grief. What we do next is the only thing left to us. We begin." Outside, the November morning was ordinary and gray and indifferent to what had happened inside the cottage. Birds moved in the tree line. A car passed on the road beyond the hedge. The Muggle world continued its business, not yet knowing that the war in the hidden world had ended in a way that would eventually, inevitably, reach them too. McGonagall straightened her robes and followed him out. Sirius arrived 20 minutes later and was told, and the quality of his stillness in the moment of being told was the specific quality of someone who has received a blow that does not belong in the category of blows he had prepared for, and who must, rapidly, decide what to do with it. He decided, after 30 seconds of that stillness, to be useful. The grief would exist on its own time. The work existed now. "The child," he said. "Where?" "Hogwarts," Dumbledore said. He will make it a spectacle. He will want to be seen to have won completely. Sirius looked at the empty cottage gate. Then we begin from that, Dumbledore confirmed. 6 weeks after the fall of the Ministry, in the cold of mid-December, the Great Hall of Hogwarts was remade. The transformation took 4 hours of continuous work by 17 Death Eaters working in shifts. The house banners were removed first, brought down and carried to the entrance courtyard and set alight with ordinary fire, which was somehow worse than a spell. The Gryffindor lion caught first. The Hufflepuff badger went last. In their place, rising along the full height of the hall's transformed walls, a single serpent standard, black silk and emerald thread, wide enough that when the doors were thrown open, it was the first thing anyone saw from the entrance. The Fiendfire installation took 2 hours. Contained in an enchanted brazier the size of a wardrobe, it became the hall's new center, a fire that could not be extinguished, that had no fuel requirement, that burned with a cold green light that turned every face watching it into something slightly less human than it had been before. The surviving pureblood elite filed in 2 minutes early, because being late was no longer the kind of statement anyone wanted to make. Lucius Malfoy knelt first. He made it look natural, which was the most Lucius Malfoy thing he had ever done. Bellatrix Lestrange did not kneel. She prostrated herself, flat, forehead to the floor, arms extended, which was not the protocol, and was more than the protocol and told anyone, watching everything they needed to understand about what she was and what she believed, and how completely she had organized her life around this moment. Severus Snape stood at the back. He knelt when he must. He did not close his eyes when he did it. His eyes were on the throne dais, specifically on the enchanted cradle that had been placed beside it, specifically on the infant inside it, specifically on the fading mark on the infant's forehead that he could see from this distance, because he knew exactly what he was looking at and what it meant and what it would mean in years that had not yet arrived. Voldemort took his throne. His robes were black silk that moved without wind, a permanent enchantment, cloth responsive to some internal intent that no one had been told the mechanism of. Beside his own wand at his hip sat something that had not been there a month ago, the Elder Wand, recovered from a concealed drawer in the headmaster's desk in the weeks after Dumbledore had fled. The wand's previous master had escaped with his life and nothing else. The wand had been where Dumbledore had kept it, not on his person, which was itself a message about how he thought of it, and Voldemort had taken it with the thoroughness he brought to all acquisitions, studying its nature before presuming to carry it, understanding that the allegiance it bestowed was not permanent, and deciding that permanence could be managed through the straightforward method of ensuring no one capable of taking it from him survived proximity to him. He had not yet turned his attention to the infant in the cradle, and what that infant might, in time, become. He raised one hand. The hall went silent. He said, "The vessel of my eternity and the heir of my empire." He gestured to the cradle. Every Death Eater in the hall looked at it. Every pure-blood noble, every terrified ministry official who had chosen compliance over martyrdom. They all looked at a sleeping infant, in an enchanted cradle beside the throne of the most powerful dark wizard in a century, and they understood that this was what victory looked like, not what anyone had expected, and therefore more absolute than anything they had imagined. Bellatrix's face, from the floor, performed an expression she could not quite prevent. The adoration she had held as her singular possession, fractured suddenly by the simple fact of a baby sleeping in a cradle that should not be there. In a portrait frame near the back of the hall, one of the old headmaster portraits which had been magically silenced, a painted face watched the ceremony with the careful stillness of someone who was not merely watching but recording. Phineas Nigellus Black, whose portrait had been left in place because Voldemort considered a silenced headmaster a satisfying trophy and who had therefore been present in the hall since the beginning of the transformation. Phineas Nigellus Black, who had a second portrait in a house far from here, who had been in this hall for 6 hours, who had seen everything. That night, in the drawing room of the ancestral Black House in London, a painted face appeared in a second frame. The portrait said nothing for a long time. Then, in a voice carefully low, "He is alive. He is in Hogwarts. Write this down." In the house's kitchen, Albus Dumbledore, who had arrived 3 hours ago, who had been waiting for exactly this, wrote it down. He wrote it in the cramped, precise hand he used. for everything that mattered most, which was also the hand he would use, in the years that followed, to write 11 volumes of books for 2 children who did not yet know they needed them. 18 months into the Empire's reign, as winter gave way to a reluctant English spring, the Obscurus Division's forensic report on the Granger household used the phrase primal force event in its second paragraph, and then again in its 5th, 6th, and 8th paragraphs, because the analyst had no other language for what the monitoring instruments had recorded on a Tuesday afternoon. The event lasted 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, every object in the house that was broken, a cracked mug, a split chair leg, a music box with a damaged spring, a window with a stress fracture along its lower, left edge, repaired itself. Not in the way of a standard reparo, which pushes broken components back into approximate alignment. Repaired in the way of something that understood, at a mathematical level, the structure of what was damaged and returned it to a state that was not merely functional but improved. The music box's spring was realigned along a stress curve the original manufacturer had not calculated. The window's glass was annealed at the fracture point, the internal crystal structure realigned, so that it was now structurally stronger than it had been when new. The event then reversed. Every repaired object returned to its previous damaged state in 7 seconds, not because the magic failed, but because the source of the magic was a 3-year-old girl who did not know she had done anything, and therefore, at some unconscious level, returned everything to the state she believed it should be in. The division's forensic analyst wrote, in the margin of the report, in a different ink and much smaller script, the reversion suggests the subject does not yet know what she is capable of. The initial event suggests she is capable of things I do not have adequate notation for. The report reached Voldemort's desk in 48 hours. He read the margin note 3 times. Then he set the report aside in the specific way that he set things aside when he had already decided to act on them, and was simply completing the formality of deciding. He went to Hampstead himself. The man who arrived at the Granger door that afternoon was wearing a glamour that made him look like a moderately distinguished civil servant. The glamour was very good. It did not cover his eyes, because no glamour he had designed had managed to change what lived in his eyes. But the Muggle family at the door was not looking at his eyes. They were looking at his identification, which was real and had been real for 24 hours. He spoke to them with the precise, pleasant violence of a man who holds every card and knows the other party knows it, or will, within 5 minutes. The deal he offered was structured as a choice, which it was, technically, in the way that a surgical patient's choice of anesthetic is a choice. The Grangers would relinquish their daughter to the Empire's care. In exchange, their safety and continued professional lives in the Muggle world would be formally guaranteed by imperial decree. They would be permitted correspondence, annual supervised visits, proof of her welfare. He outlined this calmly, in the specific register of a man performing a transaction rather than conducting a theft, which was how he preferred to think of it. Hermione Granger watched this from the doorway of the sitting room. She was 3 years old. She was holding a structural engineering primer with a bright yellow cover that she had taken from her father's office shelves, which she had been reading for 2 days because the questions it raised about load distribution had not yet found anyone to answer them, and she was watching a man talk to her parents with the complete, unblinking attention of someone who was not merely observing but analyzing. She did not cry. She did not hide behind the doorframe. She watched the man's hands as he spoke, and she watched her parents' faces change as they understood what was being said to them. And she filed every piece of information away with the specific efficiency of a mind that did not yet know it was extraordinary, but was already operating as though it were. The man finished speaking. He looked over for the first time at the doorway. She looked back at him. He was the most powerful dark wizard in living memory, and he was being regarded by a 3-year-old with precisely the same quality of attention he normally reserved for archival research. Something moved in his face. Not warmth, because warmth was not a thing he experienced in the standard way. Something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of encountering, in an unexpected location, a thing that belongs in a category one has never had to populate before. He said, "What are you reading?" She held up the book. He looked at the book, then at her. He said, "You'll have better books soon." She did not say anything. She was 3, and she did not yet know what soon meant in the context of the man at the door. But she would learn. She was, as it turned out, extremely good at learning things in the context of difficult people, because the man at the door was not the last difficult person she would need to understand, and the process of understanding difficult people begins with the decision to study them rather than fear them, which she had already made without knowing she had made it, at approximately the age of 2. The nursery suite was prepared in the weeks before her arrival, walls of polished black stone, enchanted to hold a comfortable temperature regardless of the Scottish weather, high windows with emerald-set frames that admitted the right quality of light, a shelf along the east wall, 10 meters long, already full of books, a second shelf, empty, for whatever came next. Harry's cradle had been moved to the suite's main room from the throne-adjacent position it had occupied in its first months. He was 18 months old. He had dark hair, green eyes, and the expression of a baby who had opinions and was waiting for the appropriate moment to share them. He was awake when they brought Hermione in. She walked through the suite's main door, not carried because she had been very clear about not being carried, and stopped in the center of the room and looked at everything. With the systematic attention she brought to all new environments, the walls, the shelf, the enchanted stars moving slowly across the ceiling above, the baby in the cradle, Harry looked at her. She crossed the room and looked into the cradle, directly at him, at close range, with the scientific interest of someone examining a new specimen of something they have not previously had access to. He reached out, one hand, opening the specific gesture of a baby who has decided. She took his hand with the gravity of a person signing a document. The nursery maid, a frightened woman named Etta, who had been assigned to the regent's wing because she was the only member of the domestic staff who had not actively tried to resign when the assignment was posted, documented this in her diary that night, which she burned the following morning. She didn't want Bellatrix knowing about the handshake. The years of the nursery passed in the specific way that childhood passes inside an institution, structured, supervised, regulated, and, for 2 children who had begun comparing notes at 18 months, thoroughly studied. Bellatrix Lestrange came to the nursery suite when they were 4, on a Tuesday, unannounced as always, because she did not announce herself to children. She told them they were going to learn something about power. She demonstrated the Cruciatus curse on a caged creature. She did not describe what she was doing beyond the name of the curse. She watched the creature, not the children, because the watching was part of what she was teaching, that the consequence of power is the measure of the power, and you look at what you have done to understand what you are. Harry watched with blank eyes. Hermione watched Bellatrix's wrist. The angle, approximately 30 degrees from the ideal that would produce maximum effect with minimum effort. Her vocal production, too loud, serving psychological performance rather than magical precision. Her emotional state, elevated, performative, feeding the curse with raw feeling rather than directed will. She was 4 years old, and she was taking notes in her head about what Bellatrix Lestrange was doing wrong. Bellatrix turned to them when she was done and said, "Power is not given, it is demonstrated. You will remember that." Hermione said, "Your wrist angle is inefficient." The room went very still. Bellatrix looked at her. Hermione held her gaze with the serenity of someone who had said an accurate thing and saw no reason to qualify it. The quality of Bellatrix's stillness was a specific thing, the stillness of a person recalibrating rapidly, deciding between 3 or 4 responses, none of which she had previously prepared for a 4-year-old. She chose, ultimately, to say nothing. She left without the theatrical departure she usually employed. Harry, when she was gone, said, "She heard you." Hermione said, "Good." The following year, Severus Snape began formal instruction. He arrived at the nursery suite on a Monday morning with a stack of books under one arm and no expression that indicated he considered the situation extraordinary in any way. He taught Latin, Greek, and Elder Script. He taught formal logic. He taught them in the specific negative spaces of his lessons, in what he did not say after certain questions, in which passages of text he indicated without emphasis, how to identify when they were being fed incomplete information, and what to do about it. He taught them, in the 30-second gap at the end of every lesson while he packed his books, how to lie convincingly. He did this by describing the mechanics of truth-telling in such exhaustive detail that its inverse became a matter of pure technical application. He never acknowledged that this was what he was doing. They never acknowledged it either. There was, in those early years, one other regular visitor to the Regent's Wing, Draco Malfoy, who arrived on supervised visits with his father at intervals that Lucius scheduled with the precision of someone managing a political relationship. Draco was 3 when the visits began, which made him approximately the same age as Harry, and he approached the visits with the thoroughness of a child who had been coached on their importance. He was always impeccably dressed. He always addressed Harry as Your Grace, because his father had told him to, which Harry found interesting in the specific way that things are interesting when they reveal more about the person doing them than the person being done to. Harry called Draco by his first name because Harry called everyone by their first name, and because the decision about whether or not to make Draco Malfoy a useful person was already being considered at 5 years old in a way that neither Draco nor Lucius suspected. The year Harry and Hermione turned 7 produced the first visible demonstration of what they were becoming. In the training room, a standard Lumos exercise. They produced it together, accidentally, both training wands pointing at the same incantation point, the cedar and willow combination that Snape had made without explanation the month before. What came out was not Lumos. The pulse of white gold light traveled outward from their combined wands, with the specific force of something that had been waiting to exist, and had finally found the right conditions. It moved through the room's interior like a held breath releasing, hit the suite's corridor exit, and expanded rather than stopping, down the corridor, around the corner, striking Bellatrix. Lestrange, who was rounding that corner at that exact moment, like a wall of compressed air. She went down hard. Her wand spun 6 meters. She got up, she came around the corner and looked at them, and they looked at her, and no one spoke for 11 seconds. Bellatrix ran a rapid internal assessment of what this meant and what she should do about it. She did not report it to Voldemort that night. She thought about it for 3 days. When she did report it, she framed it as evidence of remarkable combined power, confirmation of the heir's exceptional ability. She did not mention that she had been on the floor when she identified it. She did not mention the 3 days. She would not mention to anyone in her life that she had been afraid of it. She would also, from this day forward, never walk around blind corridor corners again without checking the magical resonance first. The year they turned 8, Harry found the stone. 3rd from the left in the bottom course of the east wall of the training room's workshop area. It moved when he pressed it correctly. He always pressed walls, running his fingers along them in unfamiliar spaces, looking for the gap, the difference, the place where the surface is not what it presents as. Behind it, a folded piece of parchment no larger than a playing card, the paper age yellowed but the ink pristine. The handwriting was cramped and precise. The message was 7 lines. You are not what he made you. I am waiting. He read it twice. Then a 3rd time he replaced it behind the stone, pressed the stone back into position, and did not tell anyone except Hermione, who he found in the library portion of the suite. 20 minutes later, deeply engaged with a structural grimoire, he sat beside her and said nothing. She looked at him, read whatever was in his face. Put the grimoire down, he told her. She listened without expression. Afterward, they sat together for a long time. Outside the emerald windows, the grounds of Imperial Hogwarts extended toward the tree line, and the sky was the specific low gray of early Scottish autumn, and nothing about the view suggested anything had changed. Hermione said, "Not yet." Harry nodded. They did not discuss it again for 3 years. But, on the way back to the main room, Hermione stopped and looked at the stone in the wall for a long moment, and committed its location to permanent memory and filed everything she knew about cramped, precise handwriting in a folder she had opened inside herself that did not have a label yet. It will, eventually. On the first day of September, in the Empire's 10th year, the student intake process for Imperial Hogwarts did not involve boats on the lake. It involved 4 regional cohorts arriving by coordinated portkey at 30-minute intervals, processed through a wand registration checkpoint staffed by 2 uniformed Legion officials, directed to assigned dormitory clusters by a 3rd, and assembled in the Hall of the Eternal Flame for the Imperial enrollment address. The schedule was posted 3 weeks in advance. Lateness was noted. By 6 in the evening, 212 students stood in the hall in precise formation, wearing Legion uniforms of black, with varying grades of emerald trim indicating their assessed magical aptitude. First-year students wore no trim. They had not yet earned a grade. Among the first years, Draco Malfoy, who had spent the summer preparing for this moment with the thoroughness of a boy who had been told his entire life that preparation was what distinguished the people who matter from the people who don't. Ronald Weasley, whose blood traitor family had spent the decades since the Empire's founding in the specific, grinding poverty that comes from refusing compliance without having the resources to fund active resistance. His father had kept his job at the Ministry's most innocuous department, cataloging Muggle artifacts, and had kept it by being so relentlessly unremarkable that the Legion's behavioral monitors had never found him worth flagging. Ron wore standard robes that had been let out twice, and who had arrived at Hogwarts having been told by his mother, very quietly, on the platform, "Keep your brothers close, keep your head down, and remember who you are." Neville Longbottom, who sat beside Weasley and whose grandmother had given him a different set of instructions in a fierce whisper during the journey north. "Keep your head down and watch everything, and write it all down, because what you see may be useful when the time comes." "The time comes," Augusta Longbottom had said, "for everyone who is paying attention." Neville was paying attention. He was also specifically watching the east entrance doors at 6:02 when they opened. Harry and Hermione were not in Legion uniform. Harry was in black battle robes with emerald trim so dark it was almost invisible in the Fiendfire light. He was 11 years old and moved through the hall as though he had owned it since before the current student body's parents were in school, which was both technically inaccurate and somehow entirely correct. Hermione was in deep charcoal silk robes with runic embroidery along the hem and cuffs that was not decoration. It was Elder Script, the phrase it contained unbroken from left cuff to right hem, reading in a notation system that had not been in active use outside academic settings for 3 centuries. "The Empire is temporary. The Empire is temporary. The Empire is temporary." She had been wearing this message to every formal occasion for the past year. Across the room, at the far end of the faculty arrangement, Snape's eyes moved from her face to her hem and back to her face. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his expression. Then it was gone. In the back row of the formation, Ron Weasley leaned toward Neville Longbottom and said very quietly, "Who are they?" Neville looked at the pair moving through the hall. Not at the robes, not at the trim, at the way they moved, the way the room organized itself around them without anyone visibly adjusting, the way the Legion officials at the hall's perimeter tracked them and then stopped tracking them. Because tracking them and tracking something you can observe are the same action, and you cannot observe something that has already categorized you? "Not sure yet," Neville said, "but they're not ours." It was the most interesting thing Neville Longbottom had said in months. Ron filed it accordingly. Draco Malfoy found Harry in the corridor outside the hall during the transition between the address and dormitory assignments. He had been placed at the head of the first-year cohort precisely because his father was chancellor, and he arrived in the corridor with his hand extended and his prepared speech ready. He offered his hand, said his name, his father's title, and a half-sentence that implied equality between them in a way that his father had coached him to present as natural. Harry looked at the hand, then, pleasantly, with the specific pleasantness of someone who is not being pleasant, "We know who your father is, Draco. He knows where the administrative office is and how to authorize supply requisitions. If you'd like to demonstrate value beyond your name, I'm available for a practical skills assessment. Thursday, the workshop, 6 p.m. Bring your best work." He walked past. Draco stood with his hand still extended, experiencing something that did not happen to him often enough that he had developed an adequate response to it. Hermione paused beside him. She did not look unkind. "He means it as an offer. It's better to have impressed him than to have assumed he's already impressed." She walked on. Draco lowered his hand. He was still standing in the corridor when Ron Weasley passed him, with the specific invisibility of someone who had been practicing it for years, and noted Draco's expression with the observational habit of someone who keeps mental records of things that might eventually be useful. He filed it under, "Draco Malfoy has just lost something and doesn't know what yet." The first class Harry and Hermione attended was Advanced Charms, taught by Professor Aldrich Pemberton, a man whose particular quality of physical stillness Harry had learned to categorize as the practical stillness of someone trained in real combat. Not performed intimidation, but the conserved energy of someone who has learned that unnecessary movement costs. He taught well. Harry had learned to distinguish between the different categories of well, The well of someone who knows their subject, the well of someone who enjoys performing, their knowledge, and the well of someone who is teaching towards something, toward a specific arrangement of knowledge in a specific order that produces a specific result. Pemberton was the third kind. The Tuesday lesson always began with something simple and ended with a counter combination that was precisely what you would need to neutralize two specific offensive formations that the Legion's Grade 4 squads favored. The Thursday lesson followed a sequencing logic he recognized after close study as a ward architecture sequence laid end-to-end across a curriculum semester. Pemberton was teaching them how to resist the Empire's own enforcement units, one lesson at a time, in plain sight. After their third class, a fourth year named Thomas Avery blocked their path in the corridor. He was the son of a third-tier Death Eater, had been taking very careful notes about the school's power structure for 2 years, and had the specific quality of someone who has decided that pretending not to notice things is more exhausting than acknowledging them. "No one in there is going to pretend that was a standard demonstration," he said. "What are you two, actually?" Hermione said. "Students." Harry said, "You're superiors. But we prefer the term colleagues." Avery looked at them both. He stepped aside. He would become one of their most reliable internal sources within 3 months. Thursday's workshop produced Draco Malfoy, who arrived 5 minutes late, meaning he had spent the 5 minutes standing outside the door, deciding, and brought his best work. A runic ward scheme layered 3 deep, technically the most sophisticated piece of design work any first year had produced. Harry examined it for 2 minutes without speaking. The outer layer's anchoring sequence assumes a static magical environment. If anyone in the warded space casts above Grade 3 output, the anchor reads it as external intrusion and collapses the whole scheme. You'd lose your ward the first time someone inside sneezed too forcefully. That's a standard anchoring sequence. It's in the primer. Hermione, from across the workshop. The primer was written in 1962. The Grade 3 threshold was the casting standard then. Imperial curriculum students now regularly exceed Grade 5 by their second year. Your source material is outdated. A pause. The layering approach is interesting, though. The second and third layers have a resonance, relationship that should cancel, but doesn't, because of the phase offset you've introduced. That part is original. Draco looked at her. "How do I fix the anchoring sequence?" he said finally. Harry handed him a theoretical ward architecture volume from 1979. "Start by reading what was written after 62. Draco picked it up. He would come to Thursday sessions every week regardless. The specific quality of being told the truth about what he was doing wrong was, it turned out, more valuable than being told he was doing well. At the back of the workshop, behind a stack of runic texts, a quiet first year was taking notes. Not on the ward theory, but on the way the session was run, the way the two people, at the front of it, communicated in the spaces between sentences, the way the room included rather than excluded, the way power, when wielded by people who understood what they were doing with it, looked completely different from every other exercise in power she had observed in this building. Ananya Sharma, who had the highest runic script reading score in her cohort, higher than Draco's, which was a fact Draco was aware of and had been choosing to address through indirect means until Harry had redirected that tendency very publicly in a corridor. 2 weeks prior, had accepted Hermione's Thursday invitation without knowing quite why it felt important. She was beginning to understand. Harry identified the full pattern in Pemberton's teaching in the third week, and spent a Wednesday evening laying it out for Hermione in complete sequence. Every lesson, every counter combination, the sequential logic they formed, and the specific defensive application that logic produced. Hermione sat with it for approximately 4 minutes. "I identified it in the second week," she said. "I ran a frequency analysis on the complete spell selection. There's a non-random distribution that maps to a specific defensive protocol. I've been waiting to see if you'd catch it. You were testing me. I was giving you the opportunity to notice independently. It's different. It really isn't. It slightly is." The following morning he requested a private meeting with Pemberton. He laid it all out. Every lesson, every pattern, the full 6-minute analysis, because the full analysis was what demonstrated there was no point in denial. When he finished, Pemberton said, "You're not turning me in. I'm giving you a letter." Harry produced a sealed scroll with a genuine Imperial authorization seal, requisitioned from the Chancellor's office on the pretext of a Regent's Wing inspection. "Report, authorized by Lucius Malfoy, who had not examined the request closely, because Lucius had never developed the habit of examining closely things that bore his own seal. This transfers you to a research position in Edinburgh, effective immediately. Before you go, use your communication channel to tell your handler that the curriculum sequencing method is compromised. They need to know. He paused. When you receive a green owl with a notched primary feather, it will be safe to attempt contact again. Until then, nothing. Pemberton looked at the scroll, at Harry, at Hermione. At the scroll again, he said. Whose side are you on? Hermione said, the same side as you. We're just ahead of you. He was on a ministry port key to Edinburgh before dinner. The room of requirement found them on a Wednesday in November, which was either coincidence or the castle still remembering what it used to be. Harry had been walking the 7th floor corridor for 3 weeks, on a rotation that looked like standard Regent's Wing security habit. He had been doing it because Snape's lessons in negative space, in the structural gaps between authorized information and actual architecture, had given him a sensitivity to places where a building is hiding something. The 7th floor had a corridor that was 2 meters shorter on the inside than the outside. He confirmed this with a measuring charm run as a homework exercise in front of Pemberton's replacement, a Legion-loyal professor named Graves, and the numbers did not match. He told Hermione. She said, I know, I've been looking for the entry condition. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. I needed you to find the location independently. If you couldn't, the entry condition probably requires something neither of us has yet. He considered this for exactly the amount of time it deserved. Wednesday, he said, after patrol. The entry condition was genuine need, not performed need, not the articulation of a want into a request, but the specific interior state of a person who requires something that does not exist and cannot be fabricated from available materials. Harry walked past the blank wall on the 7th floor for the 3rd time, thinking, with total precision and absolute honesty, I need a place where the Empire cannot reach. The door appeared. The room was enormous and specific, the specificity of a space shaped by accumulated intent over a very long time. The walls were books, not shelved by any recognizable system, but present in the way that books are present when they have been read and argued with, and returned to and read again. In the center, a long table, clear, with 2 chairs. On the table, nothing. The nothing was deliberate. Along the left wall, on a single shelf at eye height, separated from the rest, 11 books with cracked spines and the specific worn corner quality of things handled by many different hands over many years. Harry took the first one from the shelf. The handwriting inside was cramped and precise. He looked up at Hermione. She was already at the shelf, reading the spine of the 3rd volume. Her expression was the one she wore when incoming data was revising her model rapidly. He built this, she said. Not a question. He's been in this room. These books are his. They're not just his. She took the 7th volume, opened it to a page near the middle, and read for 30 seconds. They're ours. He wrote these for us. Look at the dates. Harry opened his volume to the frontispiece. The date inscribed there was several months after the fall of the Ministry, less than a year into the Empire, 10 months after Harry had arrived in the Imperial Nursery. The book he was holding was A Theory of Loveward Magic, written for an audience of 1 and dated to a time when that audience was barely 13 months old. Dumbledore had been writing them books since before they could read. They did not speak for a while. Harry opened his book to a random page and read. He read about the primal counterseal, about the specific mechanism by which his mother's intention, left incomplete, scattered into ambient magic rather than forming the ward it was designed to form. He read Dumbledore's analysis of the Somnum Perpetuum, its structure, its limitations, the specific conditions under which it begins to degrade. He read that degradation was possible. He read that the spell's binding on Lily Potter was built on a foundation that assumed the caster's continued magical dominance. That if that dominance were structurally destabilized, at the soul level, through the specific mechanism of Horcrux destruction, the binding would weaken incrementally. He closed the book. He knows about the Horcruxes, he said. Hermione, from across the table, without looking up, he's been documenting them since 1970. Volume 4 is entirely Horcrux architecture and detection methodology. Volume 9 is the extraction theory. A pause. Volume 9 took him 12 years to write. He's still revising it. How do you know he's still revising it? The last entry in Volume 9 is dated last month. Harry looked at the book in his hands. 11 volumes, each representing years of work, built in a hidden room inside an empire, addressed to 2 children who were going to need to know what they contained before they were old enough to have asked. "He wants a meeting," Harry said. "The last page of Volume 11 is a message," Hermione said. She set down the volume she was holding and turned to him. "He has been waiting for us to find the room for approximately 3 years. He says, I am quoting directly, that he will be in the Hogsmeade ruins on the first Sunday of December between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, and that he would prefer we come without alerting the network log, and that he will bring biscuits, which he acknowledges is a strange thing to offer given the circumstances, but which he considers appropriate on the grounds that significant conversations should have something warm to hold." Harry stared at her. "Biscuits," he said. "That is what the page says. The greatest wizard of the age has been hiding in a ruined village for 10 years waiting for us to find his library, and his opening offer is biscuits." Hermione looked at the book in her hand, then at Harry. Her expression resolved, after a moment, into something that was almost, "I've already started the preparation notes," she said. "For the meeting, if we're going to receive a full intelligence briefing from a decade-long underground operative, we should have a framework prepared so we're demonstrating that we've already begun to assemble what he knows from first principles. He needs to understand what he's working with. You want to take organized notes to a meeting with Dumbledore. We are not suppliants receiving a mission. We are equals accepting a collaboration." He looked at her for a moment. What kind of organizational system? She produced, from her robe, a black notebook. She opened it to a fresh page. She began. The village had been empty for nearly a decade, its buildings requisitioned for imperial storage, its residents relocated by administrative decree to settlement zones in the Midlands. The high street was intact. Rooftops, walls, the iron sign above what was the 3 broomsticks, still hanging on its bracket, but inhabited now only by wind and the specific quality of silence that abandoned places develop when they have been abandoned long enough to forget what they were. Dumbledore was in the back room of the post office. He was exactly as old as the portraits suggested, and nothing like the portraits suggested. The portraits showed authority, gravitas, the formal arrangement of a man who has decided how he wishes to be perceived. The actual man was sitting on an overturned crate with his hands wrapped around a cup of something hot. Wearing robes that had been repaired so many times the original color was an academic question, and he was watching the door with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for 11 years and is now confirming, with the particular relief of a very old plan arriving at its first visible milestone, that the wait is ending. Harry and Hermione came through the door exactly on time. Dumbledore looked at them over the rim of his cup. "You're exactly on time," he said. "I find that more interesting than early or late." Hermione set the black notebook on the cleanest available surface and opened it. "We have 47 minutes before the Northern Legion Patrol completes its circuit. I prefer to use the first 10 confirming what we've established independently, so you can calibrate your briefing for what we actually need, rather than what you assume we need." Dumbledore looked at the notebook, then at Harry. Harry said, "I told her not to open with that." "She's right, too," Dumbledore said, and something in his expression shifted. The specific shift of a man whose model of a situation has just been updated in a direction he finds genuinely satisfying. "What have you established?" they told him. It took 11 minutes. He did not interrupt once. This was, Harry would later reflect, the first indication of who Dumbledore actually was. Not the portraits, not the absent presence of a name spoken in whispers by people who hadn't seen him in a decade, but this, a man who could receive 11 minutes of intelligence from 2 11-year-olds without interrupting once, and whose face during those 11 minutes was doing the work of someone genuinely processing rather than waiting for his turn to speak. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The Horcrux count," he said. "You said 6. Your Volume 4 documents 7 locations," Hermione said. "We identified the 6th, independently through the Maledictum Hereditas architecture. The mark on Harry's forehead has a resonance signature that maps to the same soul fragmentation pattern. It's the 7th. Another pause. Longer. "I had not confirmed the 7th, Dumbledore said. "I had theorized it. I had not been able to verify the mechanism. The mechanism is the Maledictum. The mark wasn't simply a binding signature. It created a partial soul anchor when it was applied. not intentional, collateral to the casting. The fragment is smaller than the others, less stable. It's the one with the most exploitable degradation pathway. Dumbledore set down his cup. He looked at Harry, and what Harry read in his face was not the satisfaction of a plan confirmed, but something more complicated. Something in the territory of grief that has been held for a long time and is now encountering information that changes what that grief means. "I am very sorry," Dumbledore said, "for what was done to you, for what was put in you." "We'll address that in the extraction phase," Harry said. "Volume 9 has the theoretical framework. Hermione's been refining the sequencing. It's years of work at minimum, but the pathway is viable." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "All right." He picked up his cup. "Let me tell you about the basilisk." The Chamber of Secrets had been accessed twice since the Empire's founding. The first time was Voldemort himself, confirming the creature was alive and responsive to the Gaunt command protocol, a specific command language built around dominion assertion and subordination, maintained across decades. As far as Voldemort was concerned, the creature was a contained asset. "The creature," Dumbledore said, "has been in that chamber since the school's founding. It is older than the founders. It has been responding to the Gaunt protocol because it has had no reason to do otherwise." "What does it want?" Hermione asked. "To be commanded by someone worthy of its service, rather than merely capable of its management." Harry said, "The Gaunt protocol commands it by dominion assertion. That's not command. That's containment wearing the shape of command." "Exactly so. If someone commanded it correctly, it would be loyal," Dumbledore said. "Not compelled, loyal. The difference is significant when the asset in question is 60 feet long and has a gaze that kills." In the first month of the new year, Harry spoke to the general. He had been developing a third register of Parseltongue since Dumbledore's briefing. Permission granting, the specific command form that opens things for others rather than claiming them for yourself. He spoke the phrase. He waited. Then, a voice, coming up through the stone itself, low and specific. "The fragment, child. I have heard you speaking to the grass snakes. You understand that I am not my mark," Harry said, in Parseltongue. "The fragment in me does not command you. Only I do, and only if you agree to it." A long pause. The vibration in the stone changed. "The Gaunt line has commanded me for many decades. You speak differently. The Gaunt line commands by dominion assertion. I am offering resonance command. The difference is that I am asking." Another pause. Then, "What do you need of me?" "Not yet. I am learning what you are before I ask anything. I am telling you what I am before you agree to anything. That is how this works, if it works the right way." The vibration settled into a different register. Lower, steadier, the frequency of something at rest, rather than on guard. "Come back when you have something to ask." Harry came back 7 times over the following months. Each time he learned something. The general's history, the chamber's structure, the specific gaps in the Gaunt command, architecture where the creature's own will existed unconstrained, because the Gaunt line had never thought to constrain it. Hermione added the general to the network log under a new category, strategic assets, non-human. The general was the first entry. It would not be the last. The tribunal for Marcus Webb was scheduled for a Thursday in their 3rd year. Webb was a 4th-year student identified as exhibiting resistance sympathy. The evidence was circumstantial. It was sufficient for a tribunal, which had a different evidentiary standard from anything that could reasonably be called justice. Standard outcome: detention in the Imperial Holding Facility in Aberdeen. Aberdeen was not a place students came back from enrolled. Harry and Hermione knew about it on Monday. On Tuesday, Hermione submitted a Regent's Wing inspection request for the tribunal chamber on Thursday afternoon, citing a review of the facility's magical monitoring infrastructure. Authorized by the deputy administrative officer who signed things from a standing position, on Wednesday, Harry spoke to the general for 43 minutes. On Thursday, 8 minutes into the tribunal, the building's lower-level drainage system, adjacent to the chamber's outer wall, connected to the school's foundation utilities, began to produce a specific sound. Bellatrix sent 2 Legion members to investigate. They found nothing. She resumed. 11 minutes later, the Regent's Wing inspection team arrived with authorized documentation. The tribunal could not proceed during an authorized inspection. Bellatrix knew the administrative protocol. She could not refuse. The tribunal was rescheduled for the following Tuesday. By the following Tuesday, Marcus Webb was in Edinburgh, processed as a research exchange student on a form Hermione had completed on Wednesday night. Bellatrix filed a report noting that the inspection was conducted appropriately and that the timing was consistent with the administrative schedule. She wrote this report with the specific quality of someone filing correct information that she did not find satisfying. Harry filed this in the network log as useful. Neville Longbottom, who had been present in the corridor outside the tribunal chamber when the inspection team arrived, not by accident, because Neville Longbottom had learned in 3 years of watching everything that being in the right place at the right time was not luck but methodology, wrote 3 lines in his notebook that night. He showed those 3 lines to Ron Weasley the following morning. Ron read them and looked at Neville. "Thursday sessions," Neville said. "I think we should find out what those are." Ron agreed. He was 17 years old, the son of a blood trader family that had spent his entire childhood in the specific poverty of quiet resistance, and he had been looking for a place to put the thing he felt for 3 years. He had, he thought, just found one. Sirius Black had been running for 12 years. The Empire's wanted documentation listed his crimes: treasonous association with the dissolved Order of the Phoenix, active resistance coordination, 14 counts of infrastructure, sabotage, 9 counts of Imperial personnel interference, and, listed last, almost as an afterthought, which was itself a form of communication about what the Empire found most galling: unauthorized contact with restricted persons. The restricted persons were Harry and Hermione. He had never made contact. He had been trying for 8 years. Every approach had been blocked by the Empire's monitoring infrastructure around the Regent's wing. 3 letters, 2 coded objects, 1 enchanted portrait that self-destructed when it reached the monitoring ward boundary. He had tried from 12 different safe houses across 3 continents, and had not in 12 years been found, because he was never in the places anyone looked, which was the only principle he had found reliably useful in this specific situation. He did not know that Harry and Hermione had intercepted all of his communications. He did not know that they had been reading his coded letters with the Elder Script cipher for 4 years, learning his network structure, his operational methodology, the specific shape of what he had built from scratch with no institutional support and no guarantee that anyone was listening. He knew, in the general way that resistance operatives know things that have not yet happened, that someone was coming. He did not know when. The safe house in Inverness was a Muggle building, solid construction, 3 rooms, anonymous residential property that did not draw attention. The wards on it were Sirius's own work, and they were very good in the specific way of wards constructed by someone who had had 12 years to develop methodology through the educational process of almost being caught. Harry and Hermione cleared the wards in 40 minutes, preserving them, not breaking through, because a broken ward tells the builder someone entered. A preserved ward tells them nothing. They came through the door in the evening. Sirius Black was at the kitchen table when they entered. He was 34 years old and looked like someone who had been at war for 12 of them. Not hardness, but distillation, the removal of everything unnecessary until what remained was precisely what had kept the person alive. Dark hair grown longer than was practical, gray eyes that had not lost their sharpness despite everything they had been required to see, and the specific quality of physical stillness that people develop when being still is the difference between being found and not being found. He had his wand in his hand. Harry said, "If you'd drawn that 2 seconds earlier, I'd have been concerned about your reflexes." Sirius looked at him, at Hermione. Back at Harry, he said very quietly, "You cleared my wards." "We preserved your wards," Hermione said. "Clearing them would have told you we were here. We wanted to tell you ourselves." He was running the math. Harry could read it in his face, the rapid recalibration of someone who has trained himself to process threat and non-threat simultaneously and is currently receiving information that doesn't fit either category neatly. "You're 13, Sirius said. "We are," Harry confirmed. "You're supposed to be inside the Empire's most secure educational institution. We are also, technically, that." Sirius looked at the door, at the windows, at 2 children who had cleared his safe house words, which had defeated 3 Imperial enforcement teams, in under an hour, without triggering anything. He sat back down. He said, "All right, someone is going to explain several things." Hermione produced the black notebook. She set it in front of him and opened it to the section she had been building for 8 months under the heading Sirius Black Network. documented structure. 7 pages of dense notation, cell locations inferred from the Edinburgh node data, operational patterns deduced from the 3 intercepted letters, resource allocation logic reverse engineered from the Empire's own incident reports in the regions where his cells had been active. "We've been reading your communications since early April, 3 years ago," she said. "The code you're using is Elder Script with a polybias square modification. The modification is good. It added approximately 4 days to our initial decryption time. We've been reading cleanly since the second letter." Sirius looked at the notebook for a long time. "The portrait," he said finally, "arrived at the monitoring ward boundary and self-destructed correctly. We intercepted the magical residue from the self-destruction and extracted the encoded message before the residue dispersed. You have 8 seconds between destruction and residue dispersal. More than enough with the right extraction charm for portrait self-destruction residue." "No, I designed one." He looked at Harry. Harry said, "She designed it at 11. It was better than your concealment by the second draft." Sirius picked up the notebook and read for 6 minutes without looking up. When he put it down, something in his expression had arrived at a position, the specific position of a man who has been running an operation alone for 12 years and is looking at evidence that he is not alone, and finding that the evidence changes things he didn't know needed changing. He looked at Harry across the table, at the dark hair and the green eyes, and the mark on his forehead that the Empire had put there to own him, at the boy who was James's son, and his godson, sitting in a safe house in the Highlands, having just briefed him into a plan he could not have designed alone. And something moved in his face that was not operational, assessment and not threat calculation, and was something older and more difficult to name, something that had been waiting 12 years to have a place to go. "What do you need from me?" he said. "The Triwizard Tournament is in 14 months, Harry said. Voldemort is planning to use it for international diplomatic consolidation, the Empire's first formal engagement with foreign governments since the Statute of Silence. We need the foreign resistance networks seeded before the tournament arrives, because the tournament will give us access to international magical governments that the Empire wants to impress. Those governments need to be prepared to hear us when the moment comes. You're planning to use Voldemort's diplomatic showcase as a resistance communication platform?" "Among 4 other things," Hermione said, "but yes." Sirius picked up the notebook again. He looked at 7 pages of his own network, documented by 2 13-year-olds who had never left the Empire's most controlled educational institution. He said, "What do you need me to do?" Hermione turned to the section of the notebook marked Phase 3, International Infrastructure. She set a second quill beside it. "We need the foreign networks briefed, the international contacts prepared, and the counter-imperial diplomatic language developed before September of next year. We've drafted the initial framework. We need your operational experience to fill the gaps." She tapped the page. "Start here." He picked up the quill and started making notes. He worked for 3 hours, and they worked with him. And somewhere in the second hour he stopped and looked at Harry across the table. "You know what you're doing," he said. "Not a question." Harry said, "We've had a very good library." Sirius returned to the notebook and kept writing. Outside, the Empire's northern patrol routes traced their scheduled paths 7 miles south, and the wards that 2 13-year-olds had preserved on their way in held against the cold without registering anything unusual at all. 14 months later, in the Empire's 13th year, the delegations arrived on a Thursday. The Beauxbatons contingent came first, 12 students and Madame Maxime, whose carriage descended from a gray morning sky, the enormous winged horses settling onto the grounds, with the controlled power of things that have been disciplined into elegance without losing their nature. The Durmstrang ship surfaced from the lake in the late afternoon, exactly as scheduled, which was not coincidence. Igor Karkaroff ran his schedule the way a military officer runs his, with the understanding that precision is a form of authority even when everything else is ambiguous. Harry watched both arrivals from the Regent's wing window. The Beauxbaton students looked at the castle. The Durmstrang students looked at the students looking at the castle. Victor Crumb, descending the ship's gangplank at Karkaroff's right shoulder, looked at neither. He looked at the grounds, the ward perimeter, the specific arrangement of Legion officials. At the landing areas, he was making, Harry recognized, the same assessment Harry made when entering any new space, locating the exits. Hermione, at the adjacent window, Karkaroff was a Death Eater. First war, he turned informant before the Empire consolidated. He's been running Durmstrang as an imperial, adjacent institution since the mid-80s. Not full compliance, enough cooperation to maintain autonomy. Krum is not what Karkaroff brought him here to be, Harry said. No, he's 17 and the best competitive wizard in Europe, and is aware he's been brought here as a display piece. He finds this disagreeable. How do you know he finds it disagreeable? The way he's standing, Hermione said, and returned to her notes. The welcome banquet was the first formal occasion at which Harry and Hermione were visible to the international delegations, and they arrived after the delegations were seated. This was a choice, the assessment happening before they chose to let it happen, which is different from the assessment happening because they initiated it. They wore standard imperial robes. The delegations were expecting a display of imperial power, and not providing one created a gap between expectation and reality, and gaps are information. Across the hall, Fleur Delacour watched them with the attention of someone comparing a detailed briefing to the reality, and finding the comparison requires significant revision. Victor Krum looked at them once, and then looked away, and then looked back. Harry noted this. Neville Longbottom, seated at the far end of the student formation with Ron Weasley, also noted it, and wrote 2 lines in his notebook that he would later share with Thomas. Avery, who had been attending the Thursday sessions for 3 months, and had developed in that time the specific skill of identifying the difference between what is happening in a room and what the room appears to be about. The Goblet of Fire selected its champions in the first week of October. Its selection process had been modified by the Empire. A filtering charm ensured that selected champions carried appropriate imperial standing. From a structural standpoint, elegant. From the standpoint of someone who had spent 3 years studying runic ward architecture. Transparent in a way that suggested the designers had not anticipated anyone looking at it from the inside. Hermione had been looking at it from the inside since the delegations arrived. The goblet selected Victor Krum for Durmstrang, Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons, and for the Imperial cohort, a 6th-year Legion commander's son named Cassius Aldrich Knott, whose skill assessment placed him in the upper tier of current enrollment. The correct selection from the filter's perspective, not from the tournament's founding purpose, which was the selection of the most capable magical practitioner available. 3 days later, in the formal objection window that the tournament's founding charter allowed for challenges on grounds of procedural irregularity, Harry submitted the objection in writing. The filtering charm constituted a modification of the goblet's selection criteria, without the formal consent of all participating institutions, which the founding charter required. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang had not been informed of it. He submitted parallel copies to Madame Maxime and Karkaroff simultaneously. The hearing assembled. The tournament official from the Imperial Department of Magical Events, Madame Maxime, Karkaroff, Knott's father in a state of controlled fury, and Lucius Malfoy as Imperial Administrative Authority. Harry presented the objection, 9 minutes, every charter citation, every procedural requirement in exact order. When he finished, the department official said the Imperial modifications were authorized at the ministerial level. The tournament's founding charter, Hermione said, predates the Imperial Ministry by 4 centuries, and is not subject to ministerial modification without the formal agreement of all founding institutional signatories. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang are founding signatories. Their agreement was not obtained. The modification is therefore a charter violation, not a ministerial authorization. Lucius looked at Madame Maxime. Madame Maxime looked at the legal instrument that had just been placed in her hands, and made a decision. Beauxbatons seconds the objection, she said, her voice carrying the full authority of an institution that had been autonomously operating for 6 centuries and knew exactly what its signature on a founding charter means. Karkaroff, after a moment, Durmstrang concurs. The filter was removed. The goblet reselected. It selected Harry. The selection went into the tournament record under the Regent's Wing designation. The international press noted the distinction in detail. By the following morning, the Resistance networks seeded through Sirius's 14 months of preparation had received, through their relay channels, a simple notation. The Empire's own institutional apparatus was used against it, and the international community saw it happen. Fleur Delacour found Harry on the grounds that afternoon. The procedural objection was prepared before the selection, she said. Yes, you knew what the goblet would produce under the filter. I knew the filter's selection criteria. I applied the charter standard. She looked at him. Beauxbatons has been watching the Empire for 13 years. We have been waiting to know when the correct moment is. The correct moment is now. Not because we're ready for a direct confrontation, because we have, for the first time, an international platform and a legal precedent in a founding document that 4 centuries of Empire law cannot touch. The moment is now because this is what now looks like when you've been building toward it for long enough. I will speak to Madame Maxime tonight, she said. Victor Crumb was 40 meters away, and he had been there for the full conversation. When Fleur left, he met Harry's eyes briefly across the distance. He nodded once. Harry nodded back. The tournament had not yet begun. The Resistance had, for the first time, allies with faces and names, an institutional authority, and the memory of a legal procedure that they had supported, and that was now in the record. Hermione, when Harry returned, added a single entry under international infrastructure: Beauxbatons, active. Durmstrang, probable, legal precedent, documented. She drew a line beneath it. Phase 3, complete. The 5 Horcruxes fell between January and April of the following year, across a 14-week window designed to produce 0 observable pattern between individual destructions. The methodology was Hermione's. Each destruction assigned a specific date, time, and approach protocol. Each protocol designed to be explainable as something else if observed. Each destruction leaving a residue profile either undetectable or attributable to a different source. The timeline built around the school's own event calendar, so that every destruction fell in a window of reduced monitoring coverage. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the ring, the diary that was never meant to be found but that the Room of Requirement had been holding for 3 years, delivered to them on a shelf they had not checked before, as though the castle understood that the time had come. 5 destructions, 5 dates, 0 alarms. The diadem was last, and it required the Room of Requirement, and it required them both. An object imbued with Ravenclaw's own enchantments, the Horcrux fragment nested inside a pre-existing magical structure of significant complexity. Hermione had the precise sequence, worked out to 7 steps. She had been working on it since November. They entered the room late on a Wednesday evening. The room was simple tonight. 1 table, 1 lamp, 2 chairs. On the table, the diadem. She worked. Harry watched the door and maintained the perimeter monitoring and read the magical residue the room produced. Not interfering, not assisting, simply present in the way their operational partnership had always divided work. She designs, he calibrates the environment that allows the design to execute. 40 minutes. Near midnight, the fragment left the diadem. Not explosively. It dispersed, the fragment structure dissolved rather than shattered. Quiet and complete. The diadem itself intact on the table. Harry said, 5. Hermione said, the 6th is in you. The 7th is the snake. We addressed the snake the same night as Voldemort. Yes, which means the 6th. The extraction is ready. Volume 9, revised. I finished the final sequence last week. The fragment destabilized when we destroyed the ring. I've been monitoring the resonance in the maledictum mark since February. It's already partial. The extraction will be difficult, but the pathway is cleaner than Dumbledore's original estimate. Harry looked at the mark on his forehead, faintly visible in the dark window's reflection. When we're ready for everything else to follow. Not before. Snape found them on a Thursday in March. He was in the corridor outside the Regent's wing suite when they returned from class, standing with the specific quality of stillness that indicated he had been there for some time, and had no intention of having this acknowledged. Walk with me, he said. He took them to his private office, not the classroom, not the preparation room, but a third space that most students didn't know existed, and closed the door. He produced a folded piece of parchment and set it on the desk. The monitoring system flagged an anomalous residue pattern in the chamber-antechamber in January, he said. Consistent with basilisk resonance communication. Not the gaunt. Protocol. Something else. A pause. I suppressed the flag. I attributed it to ambient magical drift from the chamber's age. Harry said nothing. The cup disappeared from the Lestrange vault in February. The investigation was assigned to me. He unfolded the parchment and turned it toward them. At the bottom of the report, in the conclusion field, inconclusive, probable institutional administrative error. No further action recommended. Harry looked at the report. then at Snape. Snape said, "I have been writing inconclusive reports for 14 years. I am very good at them." Hermione said, "We know." Something moved in Snape's expression, not surprise. The specific adjustment of a man who expected to be revealing something and is instead being told the thing he is revealing has been known. "How long?" he said. "The handwriting on the training room note was identifiable from the library books you left us at age 6, Hermione said. "We confirmed the match at age 9. We've known since then." "And you didn't use it," Harry said. "No. Your operational value is higher if your cover is intact. Using your identity as a resistance asset is a last resort expenditure. We haven't needed a last resort yet." Snape looked at him. "That is a very cold analysis. It's the correct one, and you know it is, which is why you haven't asked me to be warmer about it." A silence that contained everything neither of them would say aloud. The 14 years, the training room, the library, the small structural choices Snape had been making since, before they could read, each one an act of faith in 2 children he was not permitted to directly protect. He said, "There is a 6th flag, the diadem residue from last week. I have not yet filed the report." "What will the report conclude?" Hermione asked. "Ambient magical interference from the castle's own enchantment architecture, consistent with the building's age and the exam season." "That's a very good conclusion. I have had considerable practice." He folded the investigation report and put it away. He was quiet for a moment. Then, without looking at either of them, "Your mother was the most talented witch I ever knew. She was building something that night that I told him about. I told him, and I have been writing inconclusive reports ever since." He paused. "It is not adequate. I know it is not adequate, but it is what I had to give." Neither Harry nor Hermione spoke. Snape picked up his quill. "The Elder Wand," he said. "We know," Harry said. "The allegiance transfer. It doesn't require combat. He will not surrender it voluntarily. He doesn't need to. He needs to be disarmed. The allegiance transfers on disarmament, the wand's own logic. He knows this theoretically, but he doesn't believe anyone is capable of disarming him." Snape waited. "The allegiance transfer doesn't require me to disarm him personally," Harry said. "It requires someone to disarm him. The wand's logic doesn't specify who." He looked at Snape. Snape looked back at him. The specific quality of the room in this moment was the quality of a room in which something that has been building for a very long time has arrived at its final form. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with the irreversible quality of a mathematical proof completing itself. The last step simple and obvious in a way that makes the preceding steps seem inevitable. Snape said, "When?" Harry said, "When I tell you." Snape nodded once. He opened the office door and said nothing else. In the network log that evening, Harry wrote, "Asset confirmed. Timing, our discretion." He closed the log. Hermione from her desk. "He's been waiting for us to ask." "I know. 14 years. I know." She picked up her quill. "We should accelerate. 5 destructions produce statistical noise that even perfect suppression can't eliminate indefinitely. How long do we have? 6 weeks if we want to be certain." 6, he said. She wrote the new timeline. The ink bled slightly at the date. She did not revise it. That same evening, Harry went to Cell 7. The cell was in the sub-basement of the Imperial Medical Wing, behind a door that appeared on no administrative map. He had known it existed since age 9. A single line in Voldemort's private cipher documentation, memorized and not acted on for years, because acting on it before he understood the full architecture would have been the specific kind of mistake that forecloses everything after. He went alone. This was the one decision Hermione had contested, not loudly, but with the specific quality of a disagreement set aside rather than resolved. She had also, without telling him, positioned herself in the medical wing's upper corridor with a 2-way signal charm that would alert her to any change below. He knew this. He did not mention it. The cell's door responded to permission-granting Parseltongue, the register that opens things for others, rather than claiming them for yourself. The lock turned. Lily Potter was on the cot. She was exactly as she had been on the last night of October, 15 years ago. The Somnum Perpetuum does not age its subject. She was 21 years old and had been 21 years old for 15 years, sleeping with the specific stillness of a state between sleep and death that had no adequate description because it had no adequate precedent. Harry sat on the floor. He sat there for a while. He said to the sleeping woman who could not hear him, "I've been reading your books." The stillness did not change. "Not books you wrote. Books he wrote about you, Dumbledore. Volume 3 is mostly theoretical work, but there's a section near the end that's just, he writes about you the way people write about things they found before they understood what finding means. Like the finding changed the shape of everything after. The narrow light at ceiling height moved with the outside cloud cover. I found a note in a wall when I was 8. 7 lines. I didn't know whose writing it was for 3 years. Now I know what the binding is built on and what it takes to pull it apart. I know the degradation pathway. I know what the Horcrux destruction does to the binding's structural foundation." He stopped. "I don't know if you can hear me. Dumbledore's conclusion is that the sensory state is ambiguous. He says there might be a quality of presence that persists. Not consciousness, exactly. The impression of consciousness. The shape of it." He looked at her face. "I'm going to destroy the Horcruxes. I've started. When they're gone, when the soul anchor structure destabilizes completely, the binding degrades. It won't be fast, but it degrades. The plan exists. The pathway is real. I need you to know that." He stopped again. He had been precise about language for 15 years. Precision was the tool he trusted most. He found, sitting on the floor of Cell 7 with the gray light moving overhead, that precision was failing him in the specific way that it fails when the thing being articulated is not a plan or an analysis, but something that lives below the level where language is the right instrument. "I have her eyes," he said finally. "That's what Dumbledore writes in Volume 3. He writes it as a fact, not a sentiment. It seemed important to tell you." He walked to the door. He closed it behind him with the same register he had used to open it. In the upper corridor, the two-way signal charm showed a steady light. He touched it once in confirmation. The light pulsed back. When he reached the medical wing's main level, Hermione fell into step beside him without asking anything. At the suite door, Harry said, "The degradation pathway is real. We need to accelerate the Horcrux sequence. I've been revising the extraction schedule since 6 this morning." He looked at her. "You knew I'd say that. I knew you'd come back from the cell with the thing you needed to come back with, and that the thing would be the pathway, and that the pathway would mean acceleration." She opened the door. Harry walked through the door, sat at the writing table, opened the network log, and picked up his quill and began to write, and the fire in the hearth made its sounds, and outside the emerald windows the Empire continued its routines. And somewhere in a cell in the sub-basement, a 21-year-old woman slept in the shape of consciousness. He wrote faster. The paperwork took 3 weeks. This was the part that no one in the Resistance Network fully understood when Harry explained it. Sirius, receiving the operational briefing through the Edinburgh relay, sent back a response containing the word paperwork underlined twice. Dumbledore's response was a single sentence. "The mechanism is elegant," which does not mean it is not also extremely dangerous. It was, as always, the most accurate summary either of them received. The mechanism was this. The Elder Wand's allegiance transfers on disarmament. The disarmament does not require combat. The Wand's own internal logic recognizes the act of being taken rather than the method of taking. Voldemort knew this. He had spent decades ensuring that no one with the capability and the motivation to disarm him existed in proximity to him. He had not accounted for the registry. Snape had been standing next to Voldemort at formal occasions and administrative reviews for 15 years. He had the clearance. He had the institutional position of someone always present and always peripheral, available in the administrative gaps between moments of attention, the specific gap where a person becomes furniture in a room rather than a presence in it, and furniture can do things that presences cannot. Harry filed the review request in the first week of March through the Imperial Administrative System, citing the Regent's Wing Authority and the Standard Inspection Protocol, requesting a formal review of the Elder Wand's registration status. Routine. The review would require the object to be presented for brief administrative verification, 30 seconds of inspection by the registry official, then returned immediately. The registry official for this review was Hermione, who had held an honorary registry position since second year through the Regent's Wing's administrative access protocols. Voldemort would attend with the wand because Voldemort attended all formal administrative reviews concerning his own registered objects personally. 15 years of registry records confirmed this. He did not send representatives for reviews that concerned his own objects. This was not vanity. It was the control orientation of a man who trusts systems only when he personally oversees them. The wand would be presented. Hermione would conduct the inspection. For 30 seconds, the wand would be in Hermione's hands. After that, the allegiance would be hers. And then she would return it, because the plan did not require her to keep it. Not yet. The morning of the appointed day, with 2 in the afternoon approaching, Harry ran the perimeter check from the Regent's Wing observation point, the same window he had been watching arrivals from since their first year, and returned to the writing table, across from Hermione. She was wearing standard imperial robes. The runic embroidery on her cuffs was, today, not the Elder script it had carried for 5 years. Today it read, in the same notation system Snape had been teaching them since age 6, it begins. She looked at Harry. The extraction first, she said. He sat in the chair across from her. The 6th Horcrux extraction took 22 minutes. She had performed the preparation so many times in rehearsal that the actual execution had the specific quality of a repeated motion practiced past the point of conscious attention, her wand tracing the 7-step sequence while she maintained the simultaneous runic containment that the fragment required to be drawn out without dispersing. The fragment was smaller than the others, less coherent, partially destabilized by the 5 preceding destructions. Harry held absolutely still and let the work happen. When it was done, the mark on his forehead was exactly as it had always been. Physical marks do not change on successful extraction, but the interior resonance he had carried since birth, the specific cold frequency of a fragment that had always been present, was gone. The silence where it had been was total and immediate. He said, "Done." She contained the fragment in the prepared vessel, a sealed silver capsule whose interior ward architecture she had built over 3 months, and set it on the table. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither said anything for 12 seconds. Then they stood. The administrative chamber, the room contained, Voldemort at the head of the inspection table, with Nagini coiled at his right side and the Elder Wand at his hip, and Snape at his left shoulder standing with the permanent expression of careful neutrality he had worn for 15 years. Harry stood at the chamber's south wall, in the Regent's observer position. The registry official at the inspection station would remember, afterward, almost nothing specific about what happened. Hermione had placed a targeted attention-narrowing charm on the room's ambient field. Hermione conducted the inspection with the same professional quality she brought to all administrative functions, the quality that had made 15 years of administrative cover possible, that had filed 15 years of correctly formatted documents through correctly formatted channels, that had been noted in 15 years of Legion assessments as thorough, meticulous, and appropriately deferential to imperial authority. Voldemort presented the wand. She took it. She held it for 32 seconds. For 32 seconds, the Elder Wand was in the hands of its new master. She returned it. Registry verification complete. Object confirmed as registered. No anomalies detected. Voldemort took the wand back with the specific quality of a man receiving something that has always been his. He did not feel the transfer. The allegiance transfer is not a sensation. It is a structural change in the object's orientation, invisible to the person who has lost it, unfelt by the person who has gained it. The wand simply is, from the moment of transfer, oriented toward a different person's will. Voldemort left the chamber. Snape, at the door, did not look at Harry or Hermione. He did not need to. In the network log that evening, Harry wrote, Elder Wand Allegiance transferred. Current Master, H.J. Granger. Transfer undetected. No flags. 6th Horcrux extracted. Contained. Current Horcrux count. 1. The snake. Then, beneath it, a single additional line that was not operational notation, but something that belonged to the private record. The most powerful weapon in history was won through a registry form. She would say this is the correct use of institutional infrastructure. He closed the log. Hermione, from her desk, I would say that. I know, he said. Outside the emerald windows, Imperial Hogwarts ran its evening routines. Legion patrolled dormitory curfew, the fiend fire burning its cold green through the night as it had burned every night for 15 years. It would not burn much longer, the 2nd day of May, in the Empire's 15th year. The meeting was scheduled. This was the specific detail that mattered. It was scheduled, through the administrative channel, as a Regent's Wing formal review of Imperial succession protocols. A procedural requirement, filed 3 weeks earlier, authorized by the deputy administrative officer who signed things from a standing position, processed through the same system that had processed 15 years of their paperwork. Voldemort attended because formal governance reviews required his presence. He sat at the head of the table in the Hall of the Eternal Flame, with Nagini at his right, and Bellatrix standing behind him and Lucius at the far end, and Snape, always present, always peripheral, at the wall. Draco Malfoy was not in the hall. Harry had made certain of that. Draco, who had spent 4 years at Thursday sessions and had learned what it meant to be told the truth about what he was doing wrong, had been given a specific task that morning that would keep him in the West Wing until afternoon. His choices, after this, would be his own to make, and they would be better choices if he made them from a position of having had time to think, rather than from the shock of immediate events. Harry considered this the last thing he owed Draco for showing up that first Thursday with a ward scheme, and the decency to ask how to fix it. Harry and Hermione sat across from Voldemort. Harry set the network log on the table, closed, the cover facing up, 5 years of accumulated notation inside. He said, "We're going to have a conversation about the future of the Empire." Voldemort looked at him across the table with the specific quality of attention that Harry had been reading since he was old enough to read faces. The attention of a man who processes everything and dismisses nothing. He said, "You have something, several things, in order." He opened the network log, turned it to face Voldemort, and let him read the index. The index alone was sufficient. The network structure, the international contacts, the Horcrux documentation, the Elder Wand entry dated 18 days prior. Voldemort's eyes reached the Elder Wand entry. He went very still. Not performed stillness. The specific stillness of a man who has received information that requires the complete reorientation of his model of the situation, and whose mind is performing that reorientation at speed because the mind of the most powerful dark wizard of the age does not pause, it accelerates. He looked at Hermione. She met his gaze with the same quality she had been bringing to his gaze since she was 3 years old, the complete unblinking attention of someone who is analyzing rather than fearing, who has been analyzing rather than fearing since before she had the vocabulary to name what she was doing. She said, "The wand's allegiance transferred 18 days ago at 2 in the afternoon. The inspection window was 32 seconds. The transfer was confirmed through the wand's own resonance test that evening. You have been working with an instrument that prefers a different master for 18 days. Voldemort said, "The Horcruxes. 5 destroyed between January and April, the 6th extracted on the day of the registry inspection, currently contained. Nagini is the 7th. He looked at Nagini. Harry said, in parcel tongue resonance command, "I am asking, not compelling. Come away from him." Nagini looked at Harry for a long moment. She moved, not toward Harry, but to the center of the room, to the space between the two sides of the table, and coiled there with the positioning of something that has removed itself from a configuration rather than joined a new one, the specific communication of a creature that has always made distinctions that her former master never knew she was making. Voldemort watched this. What crossed his face was not fear, it was the specific expression of a man who has built a life on the premise that certain things are impossible, encountering the evidence that the impossible has been assembled, piece by piece, in his own house, by the children he raised to be his continuation. He said, "How long?" Harry looked at him, not with hatred, not with triumph, with something quieter and older than either. "My whole life. I have been carrying a piece of you my whole life. I know what you feel when you solve something. I know what you feel when you dismiss someone as beneath study. I have had 15 years of knowing you from the inside." He paused. "I am telling you now, as the only person alive who has ever known you from the inside, that there is no move left." The room was very still. Then Harry set the abdication document on the table. "Sign it." "The note in the training room wall was placed when I was approximately 2 years old," Harry said. "We found it at 8. We've been building since we understood what we were building toward. Dumbledore has been our resource, not our general. We are not his operation." A pause. "No," Voldemort said, "you are not." He looked at the Elder Wand in his hand, confirming a technical fact. He said, "What do you want?" Harry said, "Your abdication, formal documented, entered into the Imperial Registry as of today. The administrative structure transitions to an interim governance council. The composition is in the document Hermione is about to give you, while a representative governance framework is established. The Empire dissolves as a designation. The schools return to their founding charters. The international statute is lifted, and if I decline, you hold a wand that prefers another master against a room that contains the documentation of everything you built and everything we have done to it, with a snake that has removed itself from your position. A pause. You are the most intelligent dark wizard of this age. You know what the position is. Voldemort was quiet for a long time. Bellatrix made a sound behind him. He raised one hand. She was silent. He said, "The abdication document." Hermione placed it on the table. He read it completely, with the thoroughness of a man who has spent 7 decades reading documents, and understanding that what they contain is less important than what they establish. He read every clause. He picked up his quill. He signed. There was, before any of that, still the matter of the 7th Horcrux. Nagini had remained in the center of the room, coiled in the space between the two sides of the table, in the position of something that had removed itself from a configuration and was now waiting to understand what the new configuration would require of her. She had not followed Voldemort when he left, which said everything about the choice she had made, and when she had made it. Before this morning, in the careful private arithmetic of a creature that had been making distinctions her former master never knew she was making for a very long time. Hermione produced the vessel from her robe, not the silver capsule that held the 6th fragment, a second one, prepared alongside the first in the months of the extraction work. Because Volume 9 had been clear, if the opportunity arose to address the 7th Horcrux in a controlled environment, rather than an open conflict, the controlled environment was always preferable. Destroying a living Horcrux within a living creature without harming the creature required a specific approach that she had spent 4 months refining in the room, where she worked best, in the hours when the castle was quiet and the fire in the hearth made its sounds, and Harry kept the perimeter while she kept the sequence. She spoke to Nagini, not in parcel tongue. That was Harry's register, and the approach she had developed did not require it. It required the creature's cooperation, which was different from the creature's compliance, and the difference mattered. Harry said, in parcel-tongue resonance, "She needs you to hold very still. She will not hurt you. The thing she is removing is not yours. It was never yours. It was put in you without your knowledge or consent, which is something I understand better than most." Nagini looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Hermione. Then she went very still. The extraction took 11 minutes, which was the fastest the procedure had produced in any of Hermione's rehearsals, and she understood, afterward, that the efficiency came from the creature's cooperation being genuine rather than enforced, that when something holds still because it wants to, rather than because it has been compelled to, the magic works differently, the way most things work differently when the person they are being done to has chosen to receive them. When it was done, Nagini moved, not away from them, not toward the door, but toward the window, where the afternoon light was making a specific geometry on the floor, and she settled into it with the quality of something that has just set down a weight it did not know it was carrying. 7 Horcruxes, 7 destructions, the sole anchor structure that had sustained the Empire's most fundamental power, and therefore the Empire itself, for 15 years. Gone. Harry looked at Hermione. She closed the vessel and put it in her robe. "Done," she said. It was the same word he had used hours ago when the fragment left him. It meant the same thing in both directions, the specific completion of a long work, arriving at its end in a room that did not look like the ending anyone had imagined, which was exactly how it should be. Bellatrix Lestrange was in the custody of the Edinburgh network within the hour. Lucius Malfoy, who had been calculating his position since the moment Nagini moved, submitted his own resignation from the chancellorship before noon through the administrative channel, correctly formatted. He did this not because he had any desire for what came next, but because he had spent 15 years watching 2 people demonstrate that the correctly formatted document filed through the correct channel was the only instrument that could not be argued with, and he had learned, from long exposure, to recognize an unwinnable position when he occupied one. The Interim Governance Council convened in the afternoon. Minerva McGonagall arrived from the Edinburgh relay 3 hours later. She had been in the Scottish Highlands for 6 months, coordinating the resistance cells through the network's northern hub while officially maintaining her status as an Imperial educational consultant, a position sustained by Snape's inconclusive reports and 3 years of carefully unremarkable correspondence. She walked into the hall with the serpent standards still on the walls and stood for a moment in the entrance, looking at everything, and then composed herself with the specific efficiency of someone who has been practicing that composition for 15 years and is now permitted to set it down. She found Harry in the corridor outside the hall and looked at him for a long moment, at the boy she had first encountered in a letter from Dumbledore, who she had been building toward rescuing for 15 years, who had apparently spent those 15 years making the rescue unnecessary. "Well done," she said, with the precision of someone who has been teaching for 40 years and has never once wasted a word. Harry said, "The standards are coming down tomorrow. We thought today should be given to the paperwork." "There is always more paperwork," McGonagall said. "You learn that eventually." "Hermione learned it at 8, Harry said. "She's been looking forward to having legitimate institutional authority behind it." McGonagall's expression did something complicated that resolved eventually into something that was not quite a smile, and was, in her particular register, the warmest thing available. Sirius Black arrived through the Edinburgh relay at 4:30, which was the first time he had been inside Britain openly since the month Harry was born. He stood in the hall with the serpent standards still on the walls. They would come down tomorrow, but today they were still there, and looked at 2 16-year-olds who had just dissolved an empire through a registry form in a scheduled meeting. He said, "You did it with paperwork." And the general, Harry said, and the wand, and 14 years of network building. "Primarily paperwork," Hermione said. Sirius looked at them both for a moment. Then he laughed, the specific laughter of a man who has been at war since he was 22 and has just been told that the war ended in a governance review, and who finds this both absurd and entirely appropriate, and who has not laughed like this in 12 years, and discovers, in the laughing, that the specific muscle that produces it still works. It was a good sound, the kind of sound that echoes in a room that has been holding a cold fire at its center for 15 years, and is not going to have to do that anymore. Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom found their way to the hall at some point in the evening. Ron because someone had told him it was over and he needed to see it to believe it. Because the Weasley family had spent 16 years in the specific, grinding poverty of quiet resistance. His father cataloging Muggle artifacts in the Ministry's most innocuous department, his mother writing letters to distant relatives in language that sounded like ordinary news and was anything but, and Ron had spent his time at Imperial Hogwarts learning, with increasing precision, the difference between what the institution presented as power and what power actually looked like when it was being done correctly. He had been to Thursday sessions for 3 months. He had a pretty good understanding of what power correctly applied looked like by now. Neville because his grandmother's coded message had arrived that morning through the Edinburgh relay, the message she had been holding since he was 11, written the day before his departure for Hogwarts, sealed with a charm she had told him she would break only when it was safe for him to know what it said. He had opened it an hour ago in the dormitory, alone, and had sat with it for a while before coming to the hall. The message said, "Your parents would be proud of you. Now go see what happened." They stood at the back of the hall, 2 boys who had spent 5 years keeping their heads down and watching everything, looking at the cleared room and the serpent standards waiting to come down, and the interim council at the long table doing the first hours of the work that would take years. "It worked," Ron said. "It worked," Neville confirmed. He had his notebook open, and he was writing in it, because his grandmother had also said, "Write it all down, because what you see may be useful when the time comes," and the time had come, and he intended to be accurate about what it looked like. Thomas Avery was there too, at the Edinburgh node since March, transitioned out of the school through the same administrative channels that had carried 17 students to safety, over 5 years. He stood in the doorway and thought about the 4th-year corridor where he had blocked 2 students' path and asked what they were, and thought, "I knew then. I just didn't have the word for knowing." Ananya Sharma arrived later, having come from the Edinburgh relay with the 3rd cohort of returned students, those who had been processed out through the administrative transfer protocol across 5 years, and were now, in the first hours of the first free day, coming back. She had her notebook with her. She always had her notebook. She found the Thursday session group in the corridor outside the hall, and they stood together for a while in the specific quality of silence that people share when they have been working towards something for a long time and have just found themselves on the other side of it and do not yet have the language for what that feels like. Draco Malfoy came at last, from the West Wing, having completed the task he had been given and having stood for some time afterward in the corridor, thinking about what he had just done and what it meant and what came next. He came into the hall from the south entrance, and he looked at the room, the cleared table, the council, the serpent standards still waiting to come down, and he looked at Harry across the space. Harry nodded once. Draco nodded back. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was the specific acknowledgement of a choice made, the Thursday workshop choice, the first and most important choice, the choice to show up and ask how to fix the anchoring sequence and keep showing up for 4 years after, and the acknowledgement that the choice had mattered, that it had been the right one. Whatever Draco Malfoy built next would be built from his own hands rather than his name, which was what the Thursday sessions had been preparing him for, which was what Harry had been offering him from the first corridor, not membership, but the harder thing, the opportunity to be worth something independent of the accident of his birth. Snape was in his office when the council convened. He did not come to the hall. He would file his last inconclusive report in the morning. Anomalous magical residue pattern across the school's lower levels on the 2nd of May, likely attributable to the structural changes in the building's ward architecture following the administrative transition. No further action required, and then he would set down the pen he had been using to suppress evidence of the right side winning for 14 years, and he would sit in the specific silence of a man who has been holding a very long breath and has just been permitted to exhale. No one would ask him where he was that evening. He had earned the quiet. Albus Dumbledore arrived through the Edinburgh Relay near midnight, when the hall was settling into the first hours of its new configuration. He was carrying a tin of oat biscuits. He set them on the regent's table without comment, looked at the serpent standards on the walls, looked at the Fiendfire installation in its brazier, now going cold green and fading further by the minute, and looked at the room for a while the way old men look at rooms that have been holding things they should not have been asked to hold. He found Harry and Hermione in the corridor outside and stood with them for a moment. "The Room of Requirement," he said. "Volume 11. The last page. We have unfinished business there," Harry said. "The books still belong to you." "They were always for you," Dumbledore said. "They were always yours." He paused. "I would ask only one thing in return. Name it." Hermione said, "Leave volume 9. I should very much like to revise the final chapter." She looked at him. The extraction theory worked exactly as written. "Nevertheless," Dumbledore said, "the ending it describes is not quite right. I wrote it when the ending was something I was imagining. I should like to write it now that I know what it actually looks like." He picked up one of the biscuits from the tin. He offered the tin to Harry and Hermione. They took one each. The corridor was very quiet, and outside, the Scottish night was doing what it always did above Hogwarts, running its indifferent course. Stars and wind and the specific cold, high ground, and the school below it was, for the first time in 15 years, in the process of becoming something other than what it had been made into. Not restored, because you cannot restore something to a state it did not occupy perfectly even before, but made new, from the materials that had survived, which was always the only way forward, and the only forward worth taking. Lily Potter woke in cell 7 near midnight. The binding's degradation had been building since the 5th Horcrux fell in April, and the abdication, destabilizing the soul anchor structure at its remaining foundation, completed the process in the hours after the signing. She woke slowly, in the way of someone returning from a very long distance. The first thing she saw was the ceiling of a cell she did not recognize. The second thing she saw was Harry, sitting on the floor against the wall. She said, "How long?" 15 years. She looked at him, at his face, at the green eyes. She said, "You have your father's face. I have your eyes," he said. Dumbledore writes it in volume 3. He writes it as a fact, not a sentiment. It seemed important to tell you. She sat up slowly. She looked at the window, the narrow band of light that was, tonight, not gray but black and full of stars, so many that the window seemed too small to contain the impression of them. She said, "What happened?" "Everything," he said. I'll tell you all of it. We have time now. She looked at him for a long moment. She reached out and put her hand over his, and he let her, and the cell was very quiet, and outside the window the stars continued their indifferent course above a country that was, for the first time in 15 years, in the early hours of the morning, after an empire. Somewhere in the school above them, the fiend fire in the Hall of the Eternal Flame was going cold for the first time. Not extinguished. It could not be extinguished, which was the point of it, but failing the way the magic of a contained fire fails when the intent behind the containment dissolves. It was going cold green by degrees, the color leaching out of it as the specific will that had kept it burning for 15 years signed its name and set the quill down. The serpent standards were still on the walls. They would come down tomorrow, and there would be paperwork about that too, and about 100,000 other things, and the paperwork would take years, and the years would be difficult, and the difficulty would be the real work, the work that begins after the moment that everyone remembers as the ending. The paperwork would be considerable. Hermione was already writing. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.